My name is Ethan Mercer. I'm 33 years old. And 3 weeks ago, my parents texted me not to attend their anniversary party because the guest list is very specific. That was the exact wording. Very specific. Only high-profile guests, judges, partners from my father's old firm, investors Andrew works with, people who wouldn't understand what you do. I've been erased before. 10 years of Christmas cards without my face in them. 10 years of being introduced at country club dinners as our younger son. He works with old buildings. 10 years of standing slightly outside the frame. But this was different. This wasn't subtle. It wasn't social maneuvering. It was final. So I stayed in my apartment that night. No protest. No argument. I stopped explaining myself to them years ago. Then my phone rang. Andrew. He never calls unless there's leverage involved. His voice wasn't calm. What did you tell people? He asked. No, hello. Mom and Dad just saw the news. I didn't tell anyone anything. I said. A pause. You should have warned us. Warned them about what? I didn't hide anything. I just stopped reporting my life to people who decided a long time ago I didn't measure up. And whatever they had just discovered, whatever headline, whatever article, whatever name they heard, it wasn't new. It was just the first time they were forced to see it. Before I take you back and explain how we got here, let me say this. If you've ever been quietly excluded by your own family, not screamed at, not disowned, he just slowly edited out, you know how clean that kind of rejection feels. It doesn't bruise. It erases. If this story hits somewhere familiar, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you actually want to hear the rest. And tell me something. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your city and local time in the comments. I read more of them than you think. Now, let me take you back 3 years to the project that changed everything. I grew up in Lake Forest, just north of Chicago. Tree-lined streets, colonial facades, lawns trimmed with surgical precision. The kind of neighborhood where reputation travels faster than truth. The Mercer family looked solid from the outside. Country club membership, 4th of July parties, Christmas cards printed on thick matte stock with gold lettering. Andrew always stood in the center of those photos. My older brother was the blueprint. Firstborn, confident, varsity everything, law degree from Northwestern, private equity by 30. He spoke in clean sentences and firm handshakes. My father understood him. Deals, leverage, winning. Andrew built capital. I built things that already existed. I chose architecture, not the glass tower kind. Historic preservation, the kind of work that involves crawling through attics that haven't been touched in a century, brushing soot off original beams, fighting city councils to save buildings developers want flattened. My father once said at Thanksgiving, carving turkey like he was dissecting a contract. Your brother builds the future. You restore the past. He didn't mean it as a compliment. My mother was more polished about it. At book club luncheon, she'd say, Ethan does something with renovations. Very niche. Niche was her favorite word for me. I wasn't loud enough, not ambitious enough, not strategic enough, just not enough. The last time I appeared in a Mercer family photo was Andrew's wedding 10 years ago. I remember standing slightly off to the side in a suit I'd bought secondhand in Evanston because I just finished grad school and didn't have much. Andrew was centered beside his bride. My parents were angled toward him like sunflowers. No one was looking at me. A week later, the version posted online didn't include me at all. When I asked my mother about it, she said, the composition was cleaner, like I was visual clutter. After that, I stopped expecting to be included. Christmas invitations stopped arriving. At first, it was scheduling conflicts. Then it was small gathering this year. Eventually, it was nothing at all. 10 years of silence can do one of two things to a man: break him or sharpen him. Last Christmas, I drove 2 hours through a snowstorm anyway. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me still wanted to test whether the door was locked. My mother opened it in a cashmere sweater and a look that lasted half a second too long. Ethan, we weren't expecting you. I handed her a wrapped package. A first edition monograph on Midwestern civic architecture I'd found at an estate sale. It cost more than I should have spent. She didn't open it. Inside, Andrew was holding court near the fireplace, explaining some acquisition deal to a federal judge my father was trying to impress. When my father saw me, he nodded once. No introduction, no correction when he said to the judge, our son Andrew handles complex negotiations. Very sharp mind. Singular. I stood there 45 minutes. No one asked about my work. When someone did glance my way, Andrew answered for me. He restores old houses, keeps busy. Keeps busy. On my way out, I saw the gift I'd brought still sitting on the hallway table. A sticky note on top. Donate. That was the night I stopped trying. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. I just made a decision. I would never again walk into a room that required me to shrink. What I didn't understand back then was this. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's accumulation. Every slight, every cropped photo, every introduction that erased me. It didn't disappear. It built. And 3 years ago, it found a foundation. 3 years ago, I got a call that shifted the axis of my life. Blackwood Manor, an 1,883 lakefront estate in Lake Forest. Limestone facade, hand-carved balustrades, original leaded glass windows shipped from England. It had survived 2 world wars, 3 economic crashes, and a century of weather off Lake Michigan. It wasn't going to survive developers. A consortium had purchased the land, luxury condos, underground parking, glass and steel with heritage-inspired accents. That was the phrase in the proposal. The Lake County Historical Society had already conceded. Too expensive, too deteriorated, too far gone. But the National Preservation Trust wasn't ready to fold. They needed a restoration proposal strong enough to justify an $18 million allocation. Not sentimental, not nostalgic, strategic. They needed someone who could prove the building wasn't a relic, it was leverage. They called me. I didn't celebrate. I closed my office door and went to work. 3 weeks to prepare the pitch. I pulled original blueprints from county archives, surveyed structural reports dating back to 1902, traced hardware suppliers that no longer existed, cross-referenced lumber sources from 19th century shipping logs. I mapped deterioration patterns beam by beam. When I presented to the trust board in Chicago, I didn't talk about beauty. I talked about durability. I didn't say the building deserved to live. I said demolition would be a financial and cultural liability. Preservation is persuasion. Margaret Hale, executive director of the National Preservation Trust, sat at the end of the table. Navy suit. No theatrics. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then she asked one question. If we fund this, can you guarantee longevity? Not emotionally. Not hopefully. Factually. 2 weeks later, I received the approval letter. I still remember the weight of it in my hands. $18 million authorized. Lead restoration architect, Ethan Mercer. Margaret's signature at the bottom. I didn't frame it. I saved it in a folder labeled documentation. Not because I expected a fight, but because I've learned that evidence outlasts opinions. For 18 months, Blackwood Manor became my entire world. I was there before sunrise most days, after sunset most nights. I hand-selected reclaimed oak to match original interior paneling. I tracked down a Vermont craftsman who still knew how to replicate 19th century hinge mechanisms. I spent 3 months restoring the main entrance doors alone, quarter-sawn white oak, warped by a century of lake air, 2 coats of hand-rubbed oil, custom brass hardware commissioned from a specialty foundry in Wisconsin. I supervised every contractor, approved every material swap, fought off shortcuts disguised as efficiency. Developers don't hate history. They hate patience. And restoration requires discipline. My firm's name was on the paperwork, not mine. I didn't correct that. I've never chased visibility. I stopped trying to impress people years ago. What I didn't know was this. Out of every possible venue in Lake Forest, my parents would choose Blackwood Manor to host their 35th anniversary party. The building I had saved, the doors I had restored, the foundation I had reinforced. They would stand inside it, toast beneath its chandeliers, invite judges and investors to admire it. And they would tell me not to come. Life doesn't need irony to function, but sometimes it uses it anyway. 3 weeks before my parents' anniversary party, I was sitting at my desk in Evanston reviewing masonry reports when my phone buzzed. A group chat notification. Mercer family. I hadn't been in that thread for 2 years. They added me back for one message. Ethan, please don't attend the anniversary event. The guest list is curated. We prefer not to have to explain your situation. Mom, Dad, your situation. Like I was a liability disclosure. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand. Because I wanted to be certain I wasn't imagining the phrasing. I didn't respond. Some messages are beneath negotiation. That same afternoon, a different envelope arrived at my office. Heavy cream stock, embossed seal. The American Institute of Architects. I opened it standing up. Dear Mr. Mercer, The AIA Gold Medal Selection Committee is pleased to inform you that you have been nominated in the Emerging Voice category for your restoration of Blackwood Manor, the Gold Medal, architecture's highest recognition. At the bottom of the letter, Margaret Hale, Executive Director, National Preservation Trust. 2 communications. Same day. One telling me I was a social inconvenience. One telling me I was a professional outlier. I placed the letter on my desk beside the family text thread, side by side. That's when Andrew called. His voice wasn't conversational. What exactly have you been telling people? About what? About whatever you're working on. There it was. Fishing, not curiosity. Damage assessment. Work. I said, same as always. A pause. You know the Harrisons are attending the party, right? And a few partners from my firm. This isn't your scene. My scene. He laughed lightly. You'd be bored. It's all investment talk and board politics. I let him finish. Then he said what he actually meant. Just don't create awkwardness. Awkwardness. That's the word families use when they mean truth. 3 days later, my father called. He doesn't make calls unless clarity is required. The guest list is final. He said, Judge Harrison will be there. Several people I'd prefer not to confuse. Confuse them with what? That woman from the Preservation Trust will be attending as well. Margaret Hale. Your mother is interested in one of their advisory boards. I didn't react. Margaret Hale. My mentor. The woman who signed the letter currently sitting on my desk. No distractions. My father added. I almost respected the efficiency. That same week, a text came from my aunt. Ethan, your mother mentioned you've been struggling lately. If you need to talk, I'm here. Struggling. I opened social media. There it was. Subtle comments under my mother's posts. Praying for your son. You're so strong dealing with everything. My mother had built a narrative. Not dramatic. Just careful. He's not stable. He isolates. He's going through something. Here's what people misunderstand about lies. They require maintenance. And maintenance fails under pressure. The AIA announcement was scheduled to go public the evening of the anniversary party. I didn't schedule that. I didn't request it. But timing has a way of revealing structural weaknesses. And sometimes, collapse is just gravity doing its job. The day before the anniversary party, the narrative was already in motion. I didn't hear it directly. I heard it through side channels. A colleague forwarded me a message someone's wife had posted in a private club group, sending strength to Eleanor Mercer. It's never easy when one child struggles. Struggles? That word again. Another text came from a former classmate who still had connections in Lake Forest. Hey, heard you've been laying low. Everything okay? I understood then. My absence had been pre-explained, pre-framed, pre-softened. Not invited because unstable sounds compassionate. Not invited because embarrassing sounds cruel. My mother chose compassion. For herself? That afternoon, I called Margaret Hale. Not to warn her. Not to vent. Just to confirm the timing of the AIA announcement. She answered on the second ring. Ethan, I was hoping you'd call. Her voice was steady. Like always. The committee finalized everything. The nomination goes public tomorrow evening. 7:30 Central. 7:30. Right in the middle of cocktails. Understood. I said. A pause. There's more. She continued. The board approved a new grant this morning. $750,000. Illinois Governor's Mansion Restoration. We want you leading it. I sat down. I didn't speak for a second. Say yes. She said lightly. You've earned it. I'm in. Another pause. Will your family be celebrating with you tomorrow? She asked. I assume they must be proud. Silence stretches differently depending on what it contains. Mine held 10 years. They have plans. I said. She didn't push. Instead, she shifted. As it happens, I'll be at Blackwood Manor tomorrow evening. Some anniversary event. I was curious to see the building in use. Of course she would be. The one person in that room who actually knew what I had done. If you're free, she added. Almost casually. I'd enjoy congratulating you in person. It wasn't an invitation. It was an opening. After we hung up, I stood in my office alone. On one wall, hung framed site photographs from Blackwood Manor's restoration. Structural reinforcement diagrams. Before and after elevations. Evidence. On my desk sat the AIA nomination letter. On my phone, the Mercer family thread. 2 realities. Parallel. Opposite. Here's what I understood in that moment. My family had constructed a mythology. The quiet son. The socially awkward one. The underachiever who never quite launched. Myth works when unchallenged. But myth cannot survive documentation. The announcement would go live whether I showed up or not. The building would still stand whether I entered it or not. The question wasn't whether truth would surface. It was whether I would be present when it did. For 10 years, I'd removed myself to avoid conflict. 24 hours before the party, I realized something simple. Avoidance protects peace, but presence shifts power. And for the first time in a decade, I wasn't interested in protecting anyone else's comfort. I wasn't at Blackwood Manor when the party began. I heard about it later from Margaret, from my aunt, from the fragments people couldn't stop repeating. The event started at 6. 150 guests. Black tie. German sedans lining the circular drive. A string quartet station beneath the restored balcony, the same balcony I had reinforced beam by beam. Champagne flowed. Crystal caught the light from chandeliers I had fought to salvage instead of replace. My mother stood at the entrance in a deep red gown, greeting guests with rehearsed warmth. My father worked the room with controlled precision. Andrew moved between clusters of investors and attorneys, laughing at the right moments, touching elbows, sealing impressions. Blackwood Manor looked immaculate, and no one mentioned the architect. Around 7, Margaret Hale arrived. No entourage, no announcement, but presence carries its own gravity. My mother crossed the foyer quickly when she saw her. Hale, what an honor. We so admire the trust work. Margaret accepted the greeting politely, scanning the crown molding, the restored oak staircase. But the limestone fireplace, every detail she knew had almost been lost. I have a personal connection to this estate, Margaret said. I worked closely with the lead architect. My mother smiled, already pivoting toward a board seat conversation. How lovely. Margaret glanced around. I was hoping to see Ethan here tonight. There it was. My mother's expression flickered one beat too long. He's not well, she said gently. You know how these things can overwhelm him. Margaret didn't blink. That's strange, she replied. I spoke with him yesterday. He sounded perfectly fine. The first crack. The American Institute of Architects published the announcement. The press release went live. The AIA website updated. Architectural Digest released a pre-written feature, 12 pages. Blackwood Manor Restoration. Lead architect, Ethan Mercer. The headline, Ethan Mercer, Restoring America's Architectural Backbone. Phones began to buzz. A journalist from the Chicago Tribune was the first to notice. Isn't this the building we're standing in? She asked someone beside her. Guests began pulling out their phones, scrolling, reading, looking up, looking around. Mercer, someone said. Isn't that the host's name? The room shifted, not loudly, subtly. Whispers traveled differently in rooms built on status. A woman approached my mother, phone extended. Eleanor, is this your son? My mother laughed. Too fast. That must be a different Mercer. But someone else had already opened the article. It says he grew up in Lake Forest. Another guest read aloud a line from the interview. I learned early that my work would speak louder than words. In my family, silence was often mistaken for absence. Silence fell, the kind that makes Crystal feel heavy. My father stepped forward, boardroom face engaged. There must be some misunderstanding, but the feature was thorough. Photographs, quotes, behind-the-scenes restoration shots. There was an image of me standing in front of the very doors guests had walked through that evening, the same doors Andrew had leaned against minutes earlier while discussing equity splits. Judge Harrison approached my father slowly. Charles, he said evenly, your son restored this building. It's complicated. The judge studied him. You told me earlier you were proud of your family. Across the room, Andrew's composure tightened. I was told later that someone from his firm asked him quietly. You never mentioned this. Andrew reportedly responded. He never told us. But the article contradicted that narrative. It referenced community presentations, public hearings, board approvals, the trust's funding announcement 18 months earlier. Public record. Margaret stepped forward again. No raised voice. No theatrics. 3 years ago, she began. Blackwood Manor was scheduled for demolition. The only reason we're standing here tonight is because one architect refused to let it disappear. She paused. That architect is Ethan Mercer. The air changed. For 18 months, she continued. He personally supervised every restoration detail in this building. The doors you entered through tonight were hand-restored by him. The chandelier above you was repaired because he insisted it could be saved. She held up an envelope. The AIA nomination became public tonight. I had hoped to congratulate him in person, 150 people turned not toward the staircase, not toward the bar, but toward my parents. My mother had no script for this. Andrew had no pivot. And in a room curated for influence, the only thing louder than applause was the absence of control. The mythology didn't explode. It simply collapsed under weight. And for the first time in 10 years, the Mercer name was being spoken in that room for a reason none of them had authored. I didn't watch the collapse happen. I felt it. My phone buzzed 3 times in 10 minutes. Messages from colleagues. A missed call from an unknown Lake Forest number. One text from Andrew. "Where are you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I stood in my apartment for a long moment, listening to the quiet. Avoidance had been my default for a decade, but Margaret's words from the night before came back to me. "If you're free, I'd enjoy congratulating you in person." I wasn't going there to make a scene. I wasn't going there for vindication. I was going because Blackwood Manor was mine in every way that mattered. I changed deliberately. Dark navy suit, no tie, clean lines, no statement piece. On my wrist, the Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso I bought after the Blackwood contract was approved. Not flashy, architectural, precise. I drove north along Sheridan Road. The lake dark to my left. I didn't rush. I've learned that timing isn't something you chase. It's something you enter. When I turned onto the Manor's drive, the estate was fully illuminated. Warm light in every window. String lights across the gardens. Town cars still parked along the circle. I parked at the far end of the lot. No valet. No announcement. I walked the rest of the way. The oak doors were open. My doors. I stopped at the threshold. Ran my fingers lightly along the grain. Quarter sawn white oak. 2 coats of oil finish. Custom brass hinges sourced from Wisconsin. 3 months of work lived in that wood. For a second, the noise inside blurred. Not fear. Not anger. Just clarity. I stepped in. Conversations were mid-sentence when someone near the bar looked toward the entrance. Then another. Then a third. Recognition travels faster than gossip. That's him. I didn't look for my parents first. I looked at the staircase. The molding. The chandelier refracting light exactly as I had planned. Presence changes acoustics. The room quieted gradually, like a tide pulling back. Margaret saw me and gave a single nod. No smile. No dramatics. Acknowledgement. My father stood near the center of the foyer. Andrew beside him. My mother slightly behind. Champagne glass held too tight. I walked toward them. Not fast. Not slow. Measured. You learn pacing when you negotiate structural tolerances. I stopped a few feet away. "Good evening," I said. My mother's lips parted first. "Ethan, we didn't expect." "I know," I replied. Andrew's jaw tightened. "This isn't the time." "For what?" I asked calmly. "For whatever you're trying to do." I held his gaze. "I'm not trying to do anything." I gestured subtly around us. "I restored this building. I thought I'd stand in it." That was it. No accusation. No raised voice. Just fact. People nearby were close enough to hear. No one pretended otherwise. My father lowered his voice. The one he uses in depositions. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No," I said evenly. "I'm standing where I worked." Margaret stepped closer, stopping at my side without touching me. "Ethan," she said, projecting just enough. "Congratulations?" The word echoed differently than anything else in that room had. Someone started clapping. It wasn't coordinated. It wasn't polite. It was spontaneous. Then another joined. Then another. Applause builds the same way pressure does. Incrementally. Andrew looked around the room, recalibrating in real time. For 10 years, I had been positioned at the edge of photographs. Now I was standing at the center of a building they were using to perform status. And I hadn't raised my voice once. There's a difference between revenge and reversal. Revenge requires effort. Reversal just requires presence. That night, I didn't take anything from them. I simply stopped stepping aside. The applause didn't last long. It didn't need to. Recognition, when it's real, doesn't linger. It settles. Margaret stepped forward, positioning herself slightly ahead of me, not shielding, not spotlighting, just anchoring. "Since Ethan is here," she said, voice steady, "Lekin, I'd like to complete what I began earlier." The room stilled again. This estate was days away from demolition 3 years ago. Funding had collapsed. The Historical Society withdrew. The board was prepared to sign closure documents. She let that land. Ethan Mercer walked into that final meeting with a proposal so thorough it forced us to reconsider. Not emotional, not poetic, specific. He traced original structural diagrams from 1883. He mapped load-bearing shifts across decades. He secured artisan contractors no one else could locate. He spent 3 months restoring the entrance doors alone. A subtle glance toward them. The ones you entered through tonight. You could feel people recalculating. Margaret continued. The National Preservation Trust has approved a new $750,000 grant for the restoration of the Illinois governor's mansion. Ethan will be leading that project. She withdrew an envelope from her clutch. Cream stock. Embossed seal. She handed it to me. This is yours. Applause again. Not explosive. My father didn't clap. Andrew didn't either. But they couldn't stop the room. Business cards began appearing. Hands extended. Congratulations. Impressive work. I had no idea. We should talk. My mother stood near the fireplace. The women from her book club carefully avoiding direct eye contact. Their posture had shifted. Not sympathy anymore. Assessment. Andrew finally stepped closer. You could have told us, he said under his breath. I met his eyes. You could have asked. He exhaled sharply. This wasn't necessary. Neither was the text. That was all. New volume. No heat. Just equilibrium. My father moved in. Controlled and deliberate. This is not the appropriate setting for family disputes. I agree. I said. Then why are you doing this? I'm not doing anything. I held up the envelope slightly. They announced it. Not me. Judge Harrison approached before my father could respond. Charles, the judge said calmly, your son's work is extraordinary. You must be proud. There are moments when language fails because options are limited. Pride requires acknowledgement. Acknowledgement requires humility. My father chose neutrality. It's commendable, he said. The judge studied him for a beat too long. I've found, the judge added, that overlooking talent in your own house can be expensive. He walked away. Andrew's posture stiffened. A partner from his firm leaned toward him, whispering something I couldn't hear. Andrew's expression changed, not anger. Concern. Across the room, my aunt approached my mother. I thought you said he was struggling. She said quietly, but not quietly enough. My mother's voice faltered. He isolates. He never tells us anything. Margaret turned toward her. With respect, she said evenly. Ethan briefed the trust board every quarter for 18 months. He's not exactly silent. That landed harder than applause. I didn't move closer to my parents. They moved into my orbit. That's the difference. My father lowered his voice again. You've made your point. I considered that. No, I said calmly. I stood in the building I restored. Andrew's composure cracked slightly. You always do this. You let things build up and then what I asked. He didn't finish. Because there was nothing dramatic to accuse me of. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't exposed secrets. I hadn't even corrected them publicly. Reality had done that. Margaret leaned in slightly, her voice low but audible. Ethan doesn't need to make points, she said. His work already did. Silence again, heavy this time. Not awkward. Final. My mother finally spoke directly to me. We were trying to protect you. From what? Success. Visibility. Questions. I didn't ask it aloud. Instead, I said something simpler. I don't need protection. That sentence ended it. There was nothing left to argue against. Because control requires a reaction. And I wasn't offering one. Guests resumed conversations, but different conversations now. Not about equity splits or vacation properties. About restoration timelines, public funding, architectural preservation. The axis had shifted, and no one could rotate it back. Before I left, I turned to my parents one last time. I'm not asking for anything, I said. No apology. No explanation. I paused. But if you ever want to know what I actually do, you can ask. Not challenge. Not accusation. Invitation. Then I stepped back. The oak doors were still open. And this time, when I walked through them, it wasn't exit. It was transition. Control isn't volume. It's restraint. And that night, restraint dismantled 10 years of narrative in under 30 minutes. The fallout didn't explode. It settled. That's how reputations shift, not with noise, but with distance. In the weeks after the party, my phone stayed quiet from my parents. No apology. No confrontation. Just silence. But Lake Forest isn't large enough to contain a story like that. I started hearing things indirectly. A colleague mentioned that Judge Harrison declined a golf invitation from my father. Scheduling conflicts was the phrasing. Andrew's firm postponed his expected partnership vote. Officially unrelated. Unofficially perception matters in rooms built on image. When you curate your family as evidence of stability, public contradiction creates doubt. Andrew texted once. You blindsided everyone. I read it, deleted it. I hadn't blindsided anyone. I just stopped minimizing myself. 2 weeks later, I received a message from my aunt. She sounded different, less cautious. I owe you an apology, she said. Your mother told me you were unstable. I believed her. That's fine. I said. It wasn't fine, but it wasn't my job to litigate it. Then came a short text from Andrew's wife. We'd never spoken much. I didn't know. I'm sorry. That one I didn't delete because that wasn't politics. It was recognition. A month after the party, I heard through someone else that Andrew and his wife were taking space. No public announcement, just absence from social events. Image cracks rarely announce themselves. They widen quietly. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Andrew directly. 4 words. You ruined everything. I stared at it for a moment. Then I locked the screen. I didn't ruin anything. I removed a cover story. Without a scapegoat, hierarchy looks thinner. 3 months passed. I focused on the governor's mansion project, structural assessments, budget reviews, preservation compliance filings. Work is clarifying. Then my father texted. No preamble. I'd like to see the mansion project when it's complete. I didn't respond immediately. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't acknowledgement. It was interest. Small, delayed, possibly strategic, or possibly something else. I let the message sit for a week. Then I replied, when it's finished, I'll let you know. No warmth, no rejection, just neutral ground. That's what change looks like sometimes. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, just recalibration. My mother hasn't contacted me. According to my aunt, she's calling the party a misunderstanding. That's fine. People protect identity before they protect truth. I don't need her to understand. Understanding isn't required for distance. Here's what I've learned. Silence can be submission, or it can be strategy. For 10 years, mine was accumulation. After the party, it became alignment. I didn't win anything that night. I didn't take status from Andrew. I didn't take influence from my father. I simply stopped absorbing the deficit they assigned me. When you remove yourself from a false narrative, it doesn't collapse dramatically. It just stops working. And sometimes that's enough. It's early morning in Springfield. Gray sky, thin winter light, cutting across the facade of the Illinois governor's mansion. The building needs work. The east wing has water intrusion damage. The limestone cornice is cracked along the north face. Half the original window frames were replaced poorly in the 1970s. It will take months just to stabilize it. I'm standing alone on the front steps, with a set of blueprints under my arm. Cold air, quiet street, no audience. This is the part no one posts about. Not the applause, not the article, not the collapse of a curated myth. Just work. 10 years ago, I was standing at the edge of my brother's wedding photo in a borrowed suit, trying not to occupy too much space. Back then, I thought visibility was something granted, something awarded by approval. I was wrong. Visibility isn't given. It's built. I looked down at the reverso on my wrist. Stainless steel, clean face, reversible case designed for durability, not display. I bought it the day the Blackwood Manor contract cleared. No one celebrated with me. That was fine. Some milestones don't require witnesses. A reporter from the Tribune asked me last week what advice I'd give to young architects starting out. I thought about it longer than necessary. Then I said, build something that lasts. And don't wait for permission from people who benefit from you staying small. She wrote it down. I'm not sure she understood it wasn't about architecture. For years, I believed if I worked hard enough, quietly enough, eventually, my family would see me differently. But recognition from the wrong source doesn't change anything. It just relocates dependency. The shift happened when I stopped trying to correct their perception. When I stopped sending updates, stopped defending my choices, stopped waiting for an invitation. You can't force someone to value what they've already decided to dismiss, but you can decide not to internalize it. The governor's mansion behind me is 200 years old. It survived political transitions, economic swings, neglect, restoration attempts that cut corners. It stands because someone reinforced the foundation when it cracked. People assume restoration is about nostalgia. It isn't. It's about structural integrity. You don't rebuild to impress. You rebuild to endure. I don't know what my relationship with my family will look like 5 years from now. Maybe it shifts. Maybe it doesn't. That's not my project anymore. This is. And if you're somewhere in your own 10-year stretch building quietly, improving without applause, working while being underestimated, understand this. You don't need the room to approve you. You need the work to hold. When the doors open and eventually they don't ask who invited you. Walk in because you built it. That's enough. If you made it this far, I respect that. Most people prefer stories with explosions, courtrooms, secret inheritances. This wasn't that. There was no hidden will, no dramatic shouting match, no cinematic revenge speech, just time, documentation, and a room that finally recalculated. If any part of this felt familiar being underestimated, edit it out. Reduce to a version of yourself that was easier for others to manage. I want you to know something. Silence doesn't mean you're invisible. It might mean you're building. Drop a comment if you're still building. I read more of them than you think. And if you want another story about quiet reversals and long games, there's one waiting in the description. Like the video if it resonated. Subscribe if you're here for the long arc, not the quick noise. Turn on notifications if you don't want to miss the next one. You don't need permission to stand in the rooms you've earned. I'll see you in the next story. This story is created by the Boundaries and Bloodlines team for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as advice or instruction. Do not attempt to replicate any actions described.